Thank you for being here this morning. I am excited to introduce our presenters, Kevin Dover and Kelly Moreland, with Elizabeth Harsma. But Dr. Harsma doesn't appear to be here right now, but that's okay. We have Kevin and Kelly, and they are going to talk about preparing faculty for ungrading. I just wanted to let you know that this has captions which are available at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can click on more and see the caption button. And this is also being recorded. All the presentations will be available on the Peralta Equity Conference webpage shortly, and I will put the link in the chat for all of you. So take it away, Kelly and Kevin. Thank you for being here today.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Is everybody able to see the slideshow that I have going?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. Then we will jump in. I'm Kelly Moreland. I'm an associate professor of English at Minnesota State University, Mankato.
My name is Kevin. I'm an assistant professor at Minnesota State University, Mankato.
And our co-presenter who isn't able to join us today is Elizabeth Harsma. She works with the state of Minnesota. And today we're presenting on work from a co-authored book, which we'll share more information about at the end of the workshop.
All right, so these are the overall objectives we hope to meet by the end of the workshop. We will hope to explain that on-grading is an incremental, interdisciplinary, collaborative approach. We hope to review different types of on-grading assessment, and we hope to describe some strategies, but of course, most importantly, we hope something practical and concrete can emerge out of this particular process, this workshop.
Before we kind of front load with a little bit of information, we've got this stop and jot. I'll ask everybody, whether you're with us live right now or watching the recording later, to reflect for about 1 minute on these questions. What do you already know about ungrading, and how would you define ungrading? Totally okay if it's a brand new term or if it's something you're super familiar with. We'll give you about a minute to jot and then we'll continue going. Okay. Now we're going to move into how the three of us have defined ungrading for our book project.
So this is my definition. So I call it a critical intervention designed to disrupt and upend current traditional assessment practices by bringing the focus back to the students and to the learning and to their success. This is Elizabeth. I'll read this one as well. An assessment approach that focuses on learning processes and product that reflects an embedded philosophy of teaching and learning that recognizes the iterative, social, and culturally embedded ways of learning.
I can read mine, I suppose. I defined it as any approach or combination of approaches to classroom assessment that deliberately works against traditional grading systems, disrupting the norm in order to help students and faculty focus less on earning a particular score and more on learning. So I think you all can see kind of the threads of disruption and focus more on learning throughout our definitions. In our project, we unpack a few ungrading methods. The first one being pre and post assessments from Kevin.
So pre and post assessments are the ones that have the most empirical work behind them. They're grounded in a lot of metacognition work. And essentially the idea is, especially from an incremental gradual approach, these are low cost. And so even if you might disagree with some of the more extreme forms of ungrading, bringing pre and post assessments into your classrooms is something that is easy to do and won't disrupt the practices that you might already have and will in fact enhance them because, as I said, pre and post assessments, force reflection on your students, but more, it also allows them to actually track their learning process, see what's being retained. So, an idea of a pre assessment allows us to set a baseline. So, essentially, our stop and jot is a pre-assessment. Essentially, we're seeing where are you exactly, what do you really know about this topic, and we can judge later. Now at the end we'll have a post-assessment to see what has changed from what you now recognize about that particular topic. So it forces the person to reflect critically in the beginning of the process before they begin engaging in learning, and then it allows them to be able to sort of do a checklist to see what have I actually learned in this overall process. So again, even if you reject ungrading as a whole, which you might, bringing pre and post assessments, which is the foundation of the ungrading philosophically, are excellent and empirical and best practices just from a pedagogical perspective. They're excellent all around, and they're easy to implement, very low cost.
The next method that we unpack in the book is mastery-based grading, and I want to make sure to give credit to Elizabeth. She took the lead on this section and is definitely the expert among the three of us on mastery-based grading. But she and we define it as an approach that ties grades exclusively to meeting learning objectives. Grades exclude behavioral and compliance factors such as homework, attendance, or meeting due dates. So the students' grade is entirely based on whether and how they're achieving that learning outcome for the course, for the assessment, etc. And with this method, it means that students are kind of expected to be earning high grades. So you might very well have a class that where everyone earns an A, or it's all A's and B's, because when they meet that learning outcome, they've done the work, they've achieved what they needed to achieve, and therefore they're getting the best and highest possible grade in the class. Um, the next section kind of feeds off of that, labor-based grading contracts. If any of you are familiar with the work of Asao Inoue, I use his work on labor-based grading contracts in my own teaching. It builds off of mastery grading in that students' grades are entirely tied to the amount of labor that they produce for the class. So students are issued a contract at the very beginning of the class. They indicate what grade that they would like to earn based on the amount of work that is required for each possible grade in the class. So if a student wants to earn an A, they have to do the most possible work, meaning turning in, yes, I will add the source in the chat. They have to complete the most amount of work. So maybe they're doing like nearly all of the homework that is required for the class. They're turning everything in on time. They're attending every class session. And then the expectations get lower as the grade decreases. So they kind of indicate at the beginning, and then they have to do the labor to match the grade that they want. And then once they've done that labor, they earn that grade at the end of the class. So it's not being graded based on the quality of their work necessarily, but what they're actually doing.
And then the last one is my grading method, which is I call it laissez-faire grading. And essentially it revolves around a couple ideas. So the first is that all assignments are released on the first day. The second is all students can hand in the assignments at any time in class. The third is that the students can revise the assignments as many times as they want before the course ends. And the last one is the functional one, which is the class is out of a flat 100 points, nothing is weighted. This class is leaning closer to the extreme end of ungrading, nearing almost an abolitionist standpoint, but it still uses assessments because, again, we're still in an institutional framework. And so there are still rules that I must follow that are mandated by the state. But essentially, it allows the students a significant amount of freedom and agency. I use the capability approach as one of the grounding aspects of the class, along with critical compassionate pedagogy in combination to essentially that the students are allowed to decide what they think is success, and they end up earning the grade that they want rather than the one that we might hope that they aspire for. It allows them a lot of personal responsibility and accountability.
I know that that's a pretty brief gloss over the methods that we talk about, but our focus here really is on how we prepare faculty at our institution through a certificate program to understand and practice these methods. So we'll get some time to kind of unpack and reflect in a little bit. Um, but the next section of the project is introducing faculty to critiques of ungrading. We think that it's equally as important as we're introducing them to the practice, why we do it in our own classrooms, and how we do it in our own classrooms to address that. There are also valid critiques of the practice, and to kind of recognize and negotiate that in our own work. So we split them into soft and hard critiques, meaning that the softer ones are ones that are a little bit easier to grapple with or negotiate, and then the hard ones get a little bit more challenging. We identify three soft critiques of ungrading, kind of all interrelated. The first one is that ungrading doesn't work for everyone necessarily. So, not all students are necessarily going to benefit from ungrading, just as not all students benefit from traditional grading. So, I teach writing. A lot of my students come into my class having been told that they're good writers and that they never having had to work very hard at writing in order to earn a good grade. And so sometimes this feels like a challenge to them to have to um, show or do equal amounts of labor as everybody else in order to get that higher grade. Um, the next soft critique is that ungrading is more work, and that kind of feeds into the example I just gave. Often students feel like they have to work harder because instead of just earning a grade and then moving on to the next task, in order to um, prove or show that they're doing the learning of the class, they might have to turn something in, fail, quote unquote, and then try again in order to be able to move on. So there's some work in that. It's also can be more work for instructors as well, because feedback, multiple attempts from students also comes with multiple rounds of feedback for us. And then finally, ungrading may not have institutional support, and this kind of starts to move us into those harder challenges where, as Kevin mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, there are things that we can do to ungrade that don't necessarily disrupt the entire course or the entire system in visible ways. And so we encourage people where if you have, colleagues or administrators who may not appreciate the work of ungrading, to look for ways to kind of do it a little bit more softly in your classes, um, that will still work, within the problematic system, but not put your job on the line necessarily.
All right, and now we're moving into the two harder critiques. So the first hard critiques, these enter the realm of, I would say, wicked problems. The first hard critique is you're an embodied person, which means there are people. As an example, I'm a black professor, and my body is constantly monitored inside an institution in which I am surrounded by whiteness, which means that there are certain things that I can and cannot do unless that I have to have receipts, sort of like a COA, cover your own ass. I need an additional layer of protection sometimes, depending on what my students or what my fellow faculty or what my dean or said what an upper level administrator might have tried to assail me with, given the kind of practices that I might employ in a classroom. I'm using myself as an example here, but I think many of you could probably think of ways in which you are surveilled or monitored inside your own department or inside your own university, and recognize that sometimes there's too much precarity in place, and in the end, I would say keeping your job is often more important than embracing a particular assessment practice. The other assessment practice, while it might have problems, has existed for a long time, and we know that it's like that you can run your classroom with that. I said just fine. So I said keep yourself always in mind. This is an embodied practice, and don't sell yourself short. You are just as important as your students. And the harder critique is the one that it's essentially impossible to handle. Is eventually on grading will become part of the it'll be eventually be co-opted by the institutional structure, and this happens with that all particular systems. It happened with intersectionality is a great example of a term that once used to be cutting, once used to be a brilliant academic critique against the institution, and now is deployed by the upper level administration. It's become governmentalized. So it's one of those things where this is often a steam valve where they put people who are problematic and troubled, and they allow them to sort of like scream into the void while simply corralling and containing them inside the institutional structure until they can sort of subsume right that practice is that into the rest of the institutional structure. So that'll eventually happen, but right now it's still considered you're still considered a bit revolutionary by taking on some of these practices. But eventually you will be co-opted, and there's nothing we can do to avoid that. That's the nature of the beast.
Okay, we have another brief writing exercise for you. Um, Now that we've kind of, again, very briefly unpacked the content, of our certificate, whether again you're in person live or watching the recording, take a minute to process those methods and critiques that we've shared and consider what ungrading methods you might already use, even if you weren't necessarily aware that you were using them. Which methods are you most interested in exploring? And what critiques or challenges of ungrading might you anticipate in your own work? And again, we'll just take like about a minute to reflect, and then we'll move into the content of our certificate. For the sake of time, I'm going to keep us going, but please feel free to continue adding reflections in the chat. Do you want me to take
So,
this?
oh, no, again, no, I'm good. I said, this is sort of where I said, this answers, I think, some of the things that I'm seeing is we really highlight, in our ungraded certificate, an incremental gradualist approaches. We obviously, so all three of us have bought into it. So we've already gone off the deep end, but we recognize that most people might not want to do that. But also not most people aren't in a position to do that. They might be fixed term, they might be adjuncts, they might not have tenure yet. There are a lot of reasons as to why they might never do this. Given some of the things we're seeing in the chat, it's like I think direct camp here is like we want people to start just do something, and that's why we highlight pre and post assessment, where we focus on the most, because those are things that can even in STEM classrooms, right, or things that have objectively right and wrong answers, or as I saw in the chat, where someone is training people who are going into medical practice. Obviously, we don't want them to to not be good at their jobs, right? So I think the incremental approach allows for people to get their toe like a little wet without having to dive all the way into the deep end. Additionally, if you saw from the definitions, all three of us, even though like we agree on ungrading in general, are coming at this from different perspectives because we each are coming from different disciplines, and this is important, right? Ungrading is a practice that is deeply interdisciplinary. You should be having conversations with as many people as you can. The diversity of, as that our own ungrading certificate said, I think clearly demonstrates that the more voices you have, the more diversity you, from a disciplinary perspective you have, the more rich the certificate becomes for the conversations that emerge, for the questions that we wouldn't consider. As an example, both Kelly and I are teach a lot of writing and dance courses, which means that we might not understand someone who teaches like a math course, and therefore having someone who comes with that perspective allows us to see something that we might not have thought of on our own. And then collaboration. I said our book was collaborative. I said I was invited in to the original collaboration because Kelly and Elizabeth started this before I was even hired at the university. And collaboration again. What one mind is good, two mind is better, three mind is even better. Again, the more people you get there, the greater the diversity of voices. I said I only said I've only seen positive things emerge out of this. But more importantly, a lot of critical conversations, a lot of disagreements, a lot of things get sussed out when you're able to have these kind of adult conversations. But I highlight the incremental thing the most because that is often the thing that gets focused on the most when we were running our own certificate. Because I said a lot of people weren't ready to go to something like labor-based contract grading or loss of fair grading, but they were ready to do assessments.
So, what are we actually doing with this on our campus? Well, in addition to practicing ungrading methods in our own classes, we have offered several iterations of the ungrading certificate through our Center for Faculty Excellence. And it's a 4-week certificate program, can be synchronous or asynchronous depending on the needs of the participants that kind of takes people through the content that we shared in the front half of the workshop. Um, Week one focuses on defining ungrading and explaining, so why and what. Um, and then in week two, we move more into those types, like the methods, the types of assessments, for again, incrementally from pre and post through laissez-faire. And then we move into critiques and critical analysis in week three. And then in week four, it's more of a workshop where people are applying ungrading to their own context. Our deliverable at the very end of the workshop is an ungrading assessment or course, whatever scale people want to focus on, they turn in a revised, ungraded version of a thing. I know that's very vague, but it could be as small as like an assessment, and it could be as large as an entire course, or even a program, honestly. Um, and each week we have about an hour on Zoom, which is recorded so people can watch it later and engage in our learning management system in discussions asynchronously. We open with a grounding. We do a little bit of discussion to kind of get started, just like we did here today, a little bit of reflection. Then we focus on maybe 20 to 30 minutes of instruction, and then a collaborative activity to round out each hour. And then there's homework each week leading up to that deliverable at the end. Um, so that's kind of the structure and the focus of the book too, is to share how we've had these larger scale conversations through the workshop at our institution, and to think about what that might look like for other people in your own institutions.
Oh, Kelly, is this, I think it's one of you.
Oh, sorry about that. I didn't realize that. But anyway, I'm grabbing a link right now to a workshopping guide, and the rest of our time is going to be workshop, and we can do that however you all would feel most comfortable. Um, we shared the kind of overview of the certificate and a little bit, as briefly as we could, the content of what we discuss in that certificate. And now we're really wanting to focus on how you might imagine bringing a similar certificate or professional development to your own institution. Feel free to let me know if that link in the chat does or doesn't work for you. Hopefully it does. Um, it has some guiding questions on it. But thank you for the thumbs up. I appreciate that. Um, Our prompts are to have you think about um, who is your, oh, it's asking for a sign in. Okay. I'm gonna go through these prompts. I'll say them out loud. I'll copy and paste them into the chat, and then I'll work on fixing that link. Um, so our prompts are, who would be your audience for a certificate like this at your institution? Um, what would the needs of that audience be related to ungrading or assessment? How might you shape the certificate outcomes to meet your audience's needs? What modality, so online or in person, asynchronous, synchronous, would work best? And how would you model effective and equitable teaching strategies? How would you welcome multiple perspectives and colleagues' expertise into the space? And then thinking about logistics. Are your planned outcomes feasible and realistic? What challenges might you anticipate to implementation? I did just put those in the chat for you, and then I'm going to take just a second to try to fix this link.
And I would say also, like, if anything needs clarification or you want more information about something, obviously we're also happy to answer those questions. So, um, you know, it can go any direction you want. Obviously, these are the questions we have prepared, but if you have other questions that aren't on there, please ask those, and we'll be happy to answer those. Yeah, so we have a question here. So, how can on-grading be applied in high-stakes environments or STEM courses? Um, and so it said there is a so like specification grading has been used, which is a type of mastery-based grading, has been used in many STEM courses, especially large STEM courses. So large STEM courses, we're talking courses that have like 1 to 200 students. And essentially it is the way specification grading operates is that they set ranges. Um, I said on each sort of assignment, and that allows like you're not getting rid of points or grading in per se, but I said you're allowing essentially the students to said to operate with a bit more agency. So but one of the main complaints is like we're not really getting rid of assessment. These are ultimate assessment modes. And so rather than focusing on like the A or B, you're focusing more on the range and there's more of an accumulation. So if you have like 10 labs, as an example, there's a range of labs that they would need to complete in specification grading to achieve a particular uh, point value or grade, if that makes sense. Additionally, I said like this position to the classifier grading, if you have a lot of time, and again, obviously this is the main constraint that like my classroom is max cap out. I'm at 25, and I know that is unique to writing intensive classrooms. So obviously, the more people you have, the more difficult this becomes. Um, Laissez-faire can be applied to a large classrooms of greater size or intensity, but it depends on how much time do you have to invest in giving that kind of feedback? Because again, when you allow people to revise a lot, each revision gets a read through by me and feedback given by me. Um, so you could apply that, I said, obviously to your own in your own way to the kind of thing, the kind of assignments that you're running, and mitigate sort of the time investment. So rather than giving like extensive feedback, you can, I said, sort of like frame how the assignment is going to operate and give, I guess you could like set up feedback markers before that's going to give depending on which direction they go on the assignment. Kelly, do you have any more to add?
I was just gonna plug Susan Bloom's book on ungrading. If it's a newer idea or practice for you and you're looking for ways to incorporate it like in your specific discipline, that book has a lot of like good like kind of shortish chapters from a variety of disciplines and a variety of people on how they have implemented ungrading methods in like their specific disciplines and practices. So I put the link just to like the bookshop listing in the chat. But we use that as kind of our like quote unquote textbook for the certificate. We don't honestly read a lot from it, but we encourage people to seek out chapters that they identify with for their particular discipline. And then I think like the introduction to this book also has a really good um, kind of breakdown of what ungrading is, how they define it, and kind of why they choose to use it in their classrooms.
Additionally, most disciplines now have at least some scholarship that in ungrading and their discipline. So using Google Scholar, so an example, I just looked up specification grading and engineering as an example, and there's a whole slew of engineering professors who have written on applying specification grading into their courses. So your discipline likely has at least one scholar who is actively working on that in the arena, and so that is another road to go down. And I'm happy if you want to email me later. I'm happy to email you these articles as that if you want to read more on things that are more targeted. All right, question. But do you find that many instructors have problems seeing how you measure whether students are actually learning more or differently without numerical grades? You want to go for that one, Kelly, first?
Sure. I think it um well, this is probably an answer to pretty much every question, but it does depend on the discipline and kind of what the instructors are hoping students achieve. But I think something that we talk a lot about in the certificate program is that there's a difference between assessing and grading. So it's not that students' work isn't being measured. It just isn't being assigned a value necessarily in the same way. So, Kevin and I both teach writing. I focus more on first year writing and teaching teachers how to teach writing, if that makes sense. And so a lot of the work that I do with the instructors I work with is focusing on how to provide effective feedback. So when I'm reading students' writing, I have criteria in mind for what they're meant to be doing in that particular assessment. And then rather than, giving them a C and saying, here's what you did wrong, I eliminate the value, I eliminate the C, but I still say, here's what needs to be improved in this particular piece. And then if it's not meeting those expectations, of, of like what I was talking about with mastery grading for like achieving the learning that's meant to be achieved through that assessment, then I give the student that feedback and I say, try again. So I would say that is how I work with instructors on, it's just kind of like a reframing. Instead of assigning a value, it's working more individually with the student and the particular assessment, if that makes sense. And I hope that's answering the question, but if not, please let me know and I can expand further. Do you have anything to add, Kevin?
I would say like, yeah, additionally it's like that like this is not an abolitionist book, which is sort of I think maybe the direction like you're going where they're actually eliminating points and they're eliminating grades in general. Even Susan Bloom's book, which sort of like sets a standard, they still are using a system that has been set by the state. So there are still grades, quote unquote, being attached, but we're coming at it from a different perspective. As that Kelly says, and you're noting it here, we're assessing, we aren't really grading. It is much more about the feedback that I think Kelly and I would give is extensive feedback that's very detailed. Most of my students are shocked usually after the first getting of they've never seen so much response to the work because that's really what we're focusing on is getting them to the place that is allowing them to achieve the outcome that is meant by that learning outcome. But even if you don't feel safe with that, like a reframe, like even just a move to points rather than grades, I feel is a shift that I think allows the students to see a lot more what's going on rather than just seeing a letter on their paper. I said it's a lot easier to understand from my perspective, like a 70 out of 100 versus you getting a C. Because with a 70 out of 100, then you usually have a rubric, and that rubric is full of information and feedback that's going to tell them exactly why they ended up where they ended up, rather than a C, which can feel like that could mean anything, unless you're giving them that extensive feedback that tells them what that means. So I think designing rubric is another excellent way to bring grading into your classroom because those rubrics allow you to write that extensive feedback, but just write it once rather than having to write it for each of your students. You can write it once for your rubric and then give that out as like in your classrooms if you have a lot of students again.
I know other people have some questions or comments. Come on, folks, don't be shy. We have about 10 minutes left. No, we don't. We have about 5 minutes left. But any last minute questions or comments? Anyone doing ungrading already? How's it going if you have been?
Hey, Kelly, do you have the next slide?
Yeah, I was just gonna say we have one last
'Cause
thing we can
yeah,
leave you with, um, which is a bud thorn.
yeah, that. But I was hoping the other. Do you have the other slide?
Oh, the one, the plug.
Oh, no. Oh, do you have the AI slide? That was what I'm sorry. I'm being vague. Do you have the AI
Oh,
slide?
I can have the AI slide. Just a second.
Because I think we can, that'd be a nice, I think, way to
Yeah.
end that discussion.
Let me see if I can quickly.
I have the slide. Can I share it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so this is obviously like a larger discussion that I think everyone probably is having, but we're also having this and on grading is what's going to happen now that artificial intelligence is that it's making a significant impact is it inside our classrooms. Um, and as I these are two things is what essentially the stake that the position that we've taken is in implementing AI directly as it into our classroom settings and training our students how to more appropriately use this as a tool as within the framework within the context right of our classrooms rather than essentially trying to ostracize it or treat it as something that they aren't going to use or isn't going to be impactful in situations. I think again, bringing it into the metacognitive enclosure, allowing them to critically analyze it and really begin to understand what the tool is a good way to as you take an on-grading approach to artificial intelligence. And additionally, I said it is it's going to be something that I said that most of us have said it's impossible to avoid. Um, and there are ways obviously we can detect it, but I think taking a grading approach, I think that's if you are entering the relationship being suspicious of your students, then you need to start over in the on-grading process. Part of the on-grading process is entering into a relationship of trust with your students. And if you don't have that already, I think on-grading is going to be a difficult task to implement inside your classroom, no matter how open you are with assessment or grading practices. Um, having that suspicion will disrupt, I think, the overall relationship because they're going to feel that suspicion, and no one likes to feel as if you're being spied upon or not being taken seriously or being accused of cheating or plagiarism. So I think recognizing the tools existing and then taking a critical approach is a more, I said, more appropriate way, like, at least from an ungrading perspective, um, at attacking this particular subject. I just wanted to touch on that just a little in the last minute or so.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much for that presentation. Um, I'm going to start looking into more of what you discussed. As I said before, I do a little bit of ungrading, and I think I can make it even better for my students by expanding it and talking about it more with my colleagues. So,
Hmm.
I mean, yeah, I can see this as the way to go. Are there any last minute questions? We have 1 minute. And I see nothing.
All right.
Yes.
So yeah, thank you all for coming and that I hope you got something out of this. Feel free to email us, is that either I or Kelly or Elizabeth. Be happy to talk
Mhm.
to you further if you have any other things you're interested in.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for attending.
Thank you so much again. I'm going to stop the recording now.